I'm going to introduce our plenary speakers now. It's a great pleasure to welcome Professor Claire Gorrara from Cardiff University and Dr. James Illingworth from Leicester and Montfort universities, both of whom are involved in the teaching of French in higher education. They're also both involved in the University Council of Modern Languages, or UCML. And our rationale for this invited talk reflects one of UCALTA's key aims, which is to raise our sights beyond ELT, beyond English language testing, to the teaching and testing of other languages, which of course we did last year when we went to Swansea, and some of us took part in an amazing beginner lesson in Welsh. As a former modern languages graduate myself many years ago now, it's a great pleasure to welcome Claire and James to tell us something of the current picture for modern languages in the UK and the work of UCML to support that. So over to Claire and to James.
Thank you very much, Linda. And James is going to share out our slides for us today. And we'll have a 20-minute presentation and 10 minutes for questions. So it's a great pleasure to be here today to talk to you all. And it's really wonderful to begin, I think, a further partnership working with your organisations. Myself and James are very involved on the advocacy and lobbying side of UCML, and we're going to give you a sense of how the organisation works more broadly. Could you to the next slide, please, James? Yeah, so we're going to give you, first of all, a sense of the trends for looking at modern language in the UK at present, looking at patterns of working. We're then going to talk about the language stories we tell ourselves, often I think quite dispiriting ones, and how maybe there are ways to rethink those. We're then going to talk about UCML's mission itself as the leading lobbying organisation for UK higher education and languages. And then James is going to talk about some of the UCML projects that are currently up and running, which we've developed in the last 18 months to really support the language community at a difficult time. And I wanted to provide on this slide here a wonderful picture of the ways in which a project in Wales working with modern languages, how young people have responded to what they find wonderful and enlightening about language learning. So I think the story of difficulty and challenge is also a story about enjoyment and pleasure and confidence. And this story about language learning is not one that is often seen here in the UK. Next slide, please, James. Okay, I want to give you the trends for looking at modern languages in the UK here today. And the first trend, of course, is the concern around the decline uptake of a language at GCSE and A-level. I'm going to give some examples here from Wales, from my home country, as it were. And it's the case that there is a long-standing pattern of decline, certainly in Wales at present. Taking a language at GCSE, and that's French, German or Spanish, has declined by over half since 2010. And as of last year, only 73 people in the whole of Wales took German at advanced A-level. So a very dispiriting picture. You see here the connection to the British Council's reports, and they've done some wonderful studies around modern languages in the UK from 2015 onwards with annual reports. You ought to have a look at that over time in longitudinal pattern. So uptake and decline. The second story we tell ourselves, the second trend, is around modern language and elitism. And here I've given you a link to a wonderful report by the National Association of Language Advisors, I think providing not a comprehensive report, but a report around the link between disadvantage and taking a language at GCSE. And there is a long-standing link between middle-class, comfortable families seeing the value of languages and those from more challenging backgrounds being advised not to take a language or not seeing as it for them. And the third trend we see is a trend around monolingualism and the belief that speaking English is enough. And I've given you a link here to a wonderful 3-day colloquium in Wales this week, all about Through the Language Prism, which shows how bilingual and multilingualism are, in essence, the default setting for many, many people in the UK, and that we're a largely multilingual society, but with a monolingual overlay that has displaced the rich multilingualism of our country. The next slide, please, James. So although we have these concerns around decline, elitism, and a fear around English being sufficient, these do link to, I think, to some quite worrying stories. Story of decline, and you've got here a link to the Higher Education Policy Institute's 2019 study of languages undertaken by a classics undergraduate at Oxford, again showing the long-term decline. But this image of decline, elitism, and loss is not the full picture. And I wanted to give you here a link to the British Academy's review article on language learning and opportunity, because we're a vibrantly multilingual society, one that has always been multilingual from medieval times onwards, and we need to really grasp that. And that sort of UCML, so have a look at the agency and belief around doing a language, not as an elitist activity, but as an important part of the rounded education of a young person and adults in the UK today. And again, looking beyond the big three, French, German, and Spanish, to the broader linguistic diversity of the UK. The next slide, please, James. So the mission of UCML really is fourfold. Firstly, we represent and speak for the modern language community in HE and cognitive disciplines around linguistics and area studies. And we've been involved in advocating and raising concern around challenging situations like the proposed closure of the Institute of Latin American Studies. Over the last year, 5 modern language departments in the UK were closed. So only 64 remain, looking from our own data. So there is a really worrying story of universities cutting the language departments as part of a cost-saving exercise. Secondly, we provide information to help provide an evidence base for those who want to look more broadly at lobbying and advocacy for languages. And we have an annual report linked here, which really sets out the importance of looking at the language development in the UK in a much more diverse way. So although modern language programmes at degree level are declining, language for all provision, university-wide language provision, is booming in many universities. So it is not a uniformly negative picture of language uptake. Students begin a language at university sometimes alongside their main degree programme. So it's a much more polyvalent story than the press stories would have you believe. Thirdly, we're a place where we run a forum for debate, and we host conferences and seminars. We have 3 special interest groups, and one of them around the virtual year abroad, which James will talk about in a moment, supporting our undergraduate students to go on their year abroad in these challenging times. We've also put together a toolkit for departments in difficulty, and we called it Surviving and Thriving in Difficult Times. So we recognise fully the difficult times. There are ways that you can be proactive, you can take agency, and you can support yourself as a community in difficult times in higher education. That has been very widely downloaded as a toolkit and advice and support source for those undergoing difficulty. And then fourthly, and that's largely my role, it's so important for us to be advocating and partnering with other organisations like the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Languages, and particularly also with SHAPE, which is the new project of the British Academy around supporting social sciences and humanities. Next slide, please, James. So really, why do we do it? Why are James and I here? Why are we so passionate about our language community? Or hi, Barry from Wales. Basically 2 things. One, we're activists. I'm a self-confessed activist academic. We believe fully that we're not making the case for French, German or Spanish. We're not looking at silos. We're making the case for languages all told. There's a great blog here from Captain Cole at Oxford around no M, no F, no modern, no foreign. It's all L, all languages as one community of practice. So we're really keen to have solidarity across the sector. Secondly, we absolutely believe in the ethical imperative to promote languages. At a time of great fracture in the UK and more globally, linguistic diversity is an absolutely essential component of social cohesion. Believing, supporting and enhancing our linguistic biodiversity is so important. And you can see here a tweet from a very, very prominent tweeter in modern languages, who I think shows a quite dispiriting scenario of the current GCSE in England and Wales being all about, planche à voile, équitation, and living in the country or town. And we are giving and serving our young people today at GCSE. It's a very dispiriting ways of learning a language. We're here to try and promote debate, discussion, and rethink how we approach language learning in the 21st century. Over to you now, James.
Thanks, Claire. So Claire has neatly set out the mission of UCML, kind of why we do what we do. What I want to talk to you about now, we've selected 3 kind of key projects that UCML has been working on over the past year that we thought might be of particular interest to this constituency. But of course, the UCML is surprisingly active, I think, and these 3 projects are just kind of the tip of the iceberg. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is what we've called our small grant scheme. This was started in September 2019, and it funds projects of varying descriptions. They can be about research in modern languages, about teaching modern languages, or outreach and widening participation in modern languages. And the financial support available for those is between £250 and £800. We've supported 16 projects over the past 18 or so months. including, and I've highlighted two here, one because the Modern Languages Teaching Forum, which is run by the University of Kent, but this year has moved online, of course, because of COVID, but we've agreed to support it, and they've widened it to beyond what was traditionally just the south east of England. And it's focusing precisely on language assessment, especially in the digital era that we're living in at the moment. And the other project is the Moving Your Language Teaching Online Toolkit that was designed by the Open University. And UCML has funded two exceptionally well-attended events. I think we had over 500 participants who were keen to kind of work on how they could improve their language teaching, their language assessment, their language testing in this kind of challenging time where most universities have moved online. And obviously the Open University has a wealth of expertise in this area, expertise that we couldn't possibly hope to have gathered over the course of a single summer. So the Open University put this on for us in collaboration with UCML. But these are just two of the 16 projects, which range from conferences on green Hispanisms to outreach events in the northeast of the country, trying to bring languages to constituents who perhaps are more switched off from modern language learning in the secondary level in the northeast of England. The second project I wanted to highlight is part of the lobbying mission of UCML, and this was something that really started in May when we heard the news that the British Council was under threat and their funding was under threat. We as modern linguists, especially at university level, are so keenly aware of the invaluable work the British Council does for modern languages, and took it upon ourselves, as it were, to spread the word, to put pressure where pressure needed to be placed, to revise this decision, or to in some way, remind the country of the value of the British Council. So this involved setting up a dedicated webpage, which included testimonials from a whole range of individuals, the academics who've experienced the work of the British Council, students, former students who've gone and done British Council assistantships abroad. A whole variety of constituents sent us in either small testimonials that you see in the image here that we put on social media through our Twitter and Facebook accounts, or longer ones that we hosted on our webpage. And we added to that by spotlighting certain British Council schemes, particularly those in the Four Nations. And as I say, our social media campaign really took off in May and was very widely disseminated. And we complemented this with letters written to the government of the Four Nations, and we received responses to all four letters. Although unfortunately, the English government response was less than pleasing, but it really reinforced the value of the British Council and how important they are. In particular, the Northern Irish, Scottish, and Welsh government were very, very supportive. Those letters that we received in response are all housed on the dedicated campaign webpage. And this was all conducted in collaboration with a number of other learning societies, the Arts and Humanities Alliance, for example, or the Association for University Professors and Heads of French. We all kind of coordinated and submitted letters to put pressure on Westminster. And finally, the other project that I wanted to spotlight here is a slightly different focus, which is a focus on teaching. And it's the one that Claire identified earlier. And it's our Year Abroad support group, which came into being because of COVID. It's a directly responsive project. We launched it in March, and it has since been joined by 52 UK departments, all of whom teach modern languages degrees that involve a compulsory residency abroad period. Of course, under COVID, with all the travel restrictions, this meant that students were either forced to return to the UK early to curtail their year abroad, or for this year to end up either not going, having to postpone it, having a very disrupted residency abroad period. Our hope in forming this group, in bringing all universities involved in these years abroad together, was to try and mitigate wherever possible the impact that could have on students. Largely because with the year abroad, there is less competition among universities. So what is really amazing about this project is the collaborative spirit that it has brought together. The 52 UK departments all send representatives. We've met monthly since March. The British Council have also sent representatives. We've also had members of UKI and other important organisations, Erasmus, come and discuss with us what we can do, how we might help mitigate the impact of COVID on the year abroad of our current students. Now, in terms of actual outputs, what this created, other than a forum where university departments could kind of compare notes, try and avoid certain departments completely cancelling years abroad, or a real kind of inequitable situation where some departments are able to send all their students, other departments not able to send any, we compiled a series of online resources, and these were really crowdsourced. These were community provided. We were lucky enough to receive volunteers in most of the core language areas who volunteered to curate a specific language section of online resources, and then UCML, we curated a more kind of global non-language specific section, and this has then been disseminated to all 52 departments with a view to helping them either put in place something virtual to help the students whose years abroad have been curtailed, or indeed to assist them in their preparation for online teaching. So it kind of had a double benefit there from that part of the project, from that output. Over the summer, we convened 3 sets of focus groups with, if I'm not mistaken, it was around 70 students from 24 different institutions. And the idea behind this was to see where the anxieties of students were around the year abroad, around what this meant for their, compulsory part of their assessment and their language level, which obviously the year abroad is designed to really help them improve. And there were, the students, what was really heartening about these meetings was that the students were so willing to help each other, and they had such constructive suggestions. They had really useful and practical things that we hadn't perhaps thought of, that we were then able to use or to add into our online resources. And we've produced, in collaboration with these students, what we've called a guide to virtual mobility that is student-facing and designed to help these students navigate this difficult time. And finally, the MOOC program, which I've listed at the bottom, is designed to help students with their intercultural competence, their intercultural skills. Obviously, the year abroad assessment is designed around 2 key areas. One is your language skill, but one is your intercultural skills, these transferable skills that make our modern languages graduates so employable. And if a student is stuck at home in, rural Yorkshire, doing language programs online rather than spending time in the country, this is perhaps something that they were going to lose. So we've put in place a MOOC program designed to help in some way encourage them to think about those intercultural skills in different ways. So I've just got a couple of screen grabs here that illustrate the kind of things that I'm talking about. The one on the right here is the table of contents from the online resource pack, and on the left are some examples of what certain departments sent into us. So there is a whole kind of password protected section of the UCML website that includes different VLE pages from the virtual learning environments of different institutions, what they put in place to help their students who were unable to travel. It was all in a spirit of collegiality and spirit of sharing amongst each other. And that's really what this project has been all about. And I've just put here some details of the MOOC program, which is organized by FutureLearn in collaboration with ourselves and managed by the learning technologists at the University of Cardiff. And we've managed to put in place 3 MOOCs, one on translation, one on language teaching, and one on intercultural studies. And these 3 MOOCs are available to year abroad students in the UK who have been unable to travel abroad. FutureLearn have made this available at a quite substantial discount, which we've then been able to kind of crowdsource back from certain institutions. The first MOOC, working with translation, launched on the 16th of November. The other 2 will run in early 2021, but thus far we've had upwards of 1,000 students register for these MOOCs, and they're currently ongoing. And these are open only to year abroad students. They come with certification, so they give them something that helps them think about intercultural skills, but that can also go on the CV. So it's quite attractive to these students. And reports from the first kind of week and a half of this MOOC are very, very positive. So that's kind of it for the 3 projects I wanted to highlight here. Of course, this is just, as I said, the tip of the iceberg, and our activity is much broader than just these 3 projects. But these are the 3 that we thought would be of most interest to you. The only other thing I want to flag is that every year we have 2 major events, 2 plenaries, one in winter, one in summer. The next one is in January 2021, on the 15th of January, and it will be a celebration of modern languages projects. So these plenaries are open to anyone who is a member of a UCL member organization. There's a page on our website that lists all member organizations. So please do feel free to have a look at that. And if you find yourself at a member organization, you'll be more than welcome to attend. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. That was wonderful, and I think that Linda would like us to chair the Q&A session. And again, if colleagues want to put questions in the Q&A, they can. I think we have 3 questions here, James. The first one is formal learning from Mohammed Tayyab. Formal learning of modern languages through GCSEs is declining due to informal learning of such languages through digital tools like apps. To what extent do we agree with this? So do we agree that there is a decline, partly because people are moving to online apps? I've got to say, colleague, I don't think that is the case. I think that actually in higher education, actually in schools, I do a lot of school outreach projects, but actually they're complementary. They work very much together. And the online app-only learner is often an adult learner or a learner who's looking at a language that is not covered, maybe a lesser taught language, for example. So our learners in university, they certainly do use apps within the programme as required support, but also externally. But I don't see any competition. I don't know about you, how you feel about that, James?
No, I'm inclined to agree. And I think, it's something that a lot of my students, at least at university, say to me, that they value being able to use these apps alongside other forms of teaching. So no, I'm not sure that is something that I've seen from my experience.
And our second question here, James, is from Umashanga, a colleague from Sri Lanka, who's asked us a really good question, actually, Umashanga, Dr. Umashanga. It's very true. What is modern languages? That's a really good question you ask, actually, and how do they help social cohesion? So I have to say, colleague, you're absolutely right. I did a conference in Wales this week on Through the Language Prism, and the colleagues from America did not see a modern language degree in the same way as the UK colleagues did. For the UK academic, modern languages is a very capacious term. It tends to cover European languages that link with historical alliances and partnerships like French, Spanish, German, Italian. But it's also increasingly now encompassing global and international language nations and regions like Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, Arabic. So in essence, a modern language is everything that's not a classical language, i.e. Latin and Greek. And departments in the UK, depending on their history and their past, have either a smaller or a larger range of languages. And in the UK, it will also cover teaching around history, politics, literature, film. It is an extremely capacious term, and each department might have a different iteration or different take on that depending on their staff body. So in a modern language department in the UK, you might have a political scientist, a film studies expert, and a literary scholar, and they're all teaching French, for example. So it's a very capacious term. If you want to come in there, James.
No, I quite agree. And one thing, I mean, you said something about, I noticed in the question, how is a modern language helpful in social cohesion? And something I've noticed my students telling me, especially those who've picked up French as a beginner, who are perhaps doing a major in something unrelated to modern languages, politics, or even a science, they often say to me, actually thinking about or learning another language has helped them, be better at speaking their own language and give them a greater understanding of their own language. And second, given them a greater openness to other cultures. So I can see precisely how modern languages and social cohesion kind of go hand in hand.
Absolutely, and again, many here, and you've got to be aware, colleagues, here the 4 nations have quite different approaches in the UK. The English government certainly in the last 2 or 3 has linked modern language with social cohesion. In Wales, the link is much more to social justice and social action. So the departments have quite different sometimes approaches. A colleague here, James, talks about putting in joint projects with the UK, a colleague working here on the KEFA programme, a colleague from Turkey, Mehmet. I think we'd have to look at that offline, Mehmet. It's normally through the Erasmus programme, but of course, that's this week is the front week for the Erasmus programme in the UK. And that links to the anonymous colleague who's asked about what would the impact of Brexit on students' year abroad. My God, that's a $64,000 question. James and colleagues have been working very, very fully with Universities UK International to have a look at this and think about it. I don't know if you could say a few words here, James. And one word is disruption. That's basically what it is. But James might be able to give you a bit more of a sense of where and how we're working.
Yeah, it's it's one of those questions that comes up at every meeting of our Year Abroad group, and the answer is always the same. It's a bit of a shrug shoulders because we're kind of not sure yet. Until there's a deal, until we know what's happening with Erasmus, we're kind of in the dark. What we know in the immediate term is that students will be facing visa restrictions. They'll be facing travel restrictions, especially in Europe. And those are the immediate impact, you know, how long they can stay abroad, how much the year abroad is going to cost financially. Some of these countries are introducing fees to get these visas. So it's one of those things that we're still not entirely sure, but we know the impact will be massive. We're just not sure how massive. It's entirely dependent on whether there will be a deal. But as I said, the Year Abroad group, which was designed as a virtual mobility group, is rapidly morphing into a Brexit group. So we're working on it. is kind of the only answer.
The next question, James, is from Akmar Zan, who's asked about, is understanding of modern languages, can it be contextual? And Akmar Zan, absolutely. Many modern language programs place as much, if not more, emphasis on the contextual learning of the language, the culture, the society, the cultural mores, as on the language. So you might find that for many language programs in the UK, for a modern language degree, it might be a 30-70 split in terms of assessment, 70 being literally on the cultural and or contextual side. So it's very much a very capacious term where intercultural understanding is core to the modern language degree in the UK. Absolutely core is the intercultural side. The next question is from Ramsey Cardwell. Does modern language actually include indigenous to the UK language like Welsh and Irish? Yes, it does. So Ramsey, so if you look at the Research Excellence Framework, which is our research assessment program every 7 years, under modern language and linguistics, we also have Irish, Welsh, Scottish Gaelic, Ulster Scots, etc. So it does cover those languages. And are they in decline? They're all undergoing a renaissance, Ramsey. In Wales, it's now compulsory for every child to do Welsh from 3 to 16, and schools are going to be asked to be increasingly more linguistically aware and bilingually orientated. The same for Scottish Gaelic, not quite as much, but they're undergoing a renaissance, often linked to, dare I say, a very strong sense of national identity and well-being. Abdullah James asks us, do you think that online teaching will fully replace face-to-face? Can I ask you to have a look at that one for us, James?
No, is the answer, is the short answer, I think. I think what we've learned is that there are ways in which online teaching can help in certain contexts or can complement some of what we do. But I think as modern languages is it's fundamentally about communication, and you lose so much of that in an online context. And that's what a lot of my students have said to me. You know, they're still enjoying their learning, and the online learning is you know, it's something, but they would prefer to be face to face. And I mean, it's a difficult one to predict, but I don't see a permanent kind of switch to online.
And James, Abdullah then also asks, is there a gap between online learning and online teaching? That's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about it in those terms. I do think, Abdullah, that the expectations and the outcomes of online learning are different to face-to-face. And I don't know about James, but I find I do a lot of flipped learning now, flipped teaching. I expect a lot more prep in advance before my seminars. Students are finding it quite overwhelming, some of them. They found that the shift to the online learning, the flipped learning approach, prep in advance, has increased their workload and their learning load substantially. So I do think that there is a difference, and teaching is certainly different online. I don't know how James feels, but I think there's much more of a frayed edge between you as a professional and you as a pastoral colleague. And I found that we need to, in the current COVID environment, be far more mindful of our students' lives outside the classroom in a way that we might not have done before. I don't know how you feel about that, James, but I felt that frayed edge. I've needed to be much more personally tuned to my students.
No, I completely agree. Which is quite a difficult thing to do when none of them put their cameras on.
Correct. And then maybe our last question before we end here, James, it's from Barry, who I think was telling me some nice Welsh words. He said, does the term modern languages, he wants to know, Chinese is both an ancient and a modern language. Do we need a new term? Barry, in my presentation, I just want the word L languages. I want it to be completely welcoming. I don't want any M, no F, no classics, no modern. I want the word just languages, because that way everybody's included. I'm quite proselytizing about this. I think that having these silos and distinctions is often to the disadvantage and the detriment of our young people who are forced to choose between a home language and a modern language. These are all language, and the metalinguistic skills are the same for all the languages. But I do feel that we need to get away from slicing the cake and just eating the whole cake as it is. I don't know how you feel about that one, James. It's a personal view.
No, I'm completely with you, 100%. We should probably change the name of UCML after this.
Precisely, that's right. We can't be UCL though. That's a university. We can't do that.
We'll think on it.
We'll think on that one. And the last one here was from Kazir, and he said, "What can you tell us about the successive online language assessment of modern languages?" Assessment. I mean, we're not really there yet, if I'm honest. Actually, I think Lindsay wants to stop there, so maybe we'll just pause out our response.
Claire and James, thank you so much. It's been really great to have that overview of the current situation, and actually seriously to raise our sights above just English as a foreign language, additional language, modern language, whatever you like to call it. And I think actually on another occasion it would be great to get you back to explore together what language testing and assessment looks like in modern languages. We deliberately didn't ask you to do that this time because we felt, I think, we needed to understand more about the situation for modern languages. But I would love us to have that opportunity at some point. So many thanks to our plenary speakers today, to Claire and to James. Thank you to all those who posed some quite challenging and fascinating questions. And I would say we look forward as UCALTA to maintaining contact with the field of HE modern languages and maybe exploring opportunities for future collaboration in the weeks and months and years to come.